All right, we're in Politics Central here. Going to talk a little post-primary day. Two crack reporters with the Tampa Bay Times, Emily Mahoney, Steve Contorno. Big story of the day, obviously, historic upset with Andrew Gillum. What are you hearing about that so far?
Well, it's interesting to see where he won. He got a lot of support in Duval County, which you would expect because there's a large black population. He was the only black candidate on the ballot. But interesting enough, he also won Hillsborough County, and he won pretty significantly in Miami-Dade area in South Florida. He's from that area, so it sort of makes sense. But there are also two candidates who not only are from there but live there and were politicking very hard down there. So the fact that he got such a big boost out of that area, I think, is one of the big surprises out of Election Day.
So the rule of thumb for Democrats has always been let's nominate a centrist person that doesn't offend anybody. What are we facing now in the general election? Ron DeSantis, hard right, Andrew Gillum, proud Bernie Sanders liberal. What are you seeing?
That's right. It's definitely going to be a battle of the bases, and we're all wondering if either of them are going to shift to the center in the general and try to capture more of those NPA, non-party affiliated voters, or if they're just going to try to turn out their bases better than the other. I mean, I was at the DeSantis victory party last night, and they didn't call the Democratic race until after they had called the Republican one, and I was out talking to DeSantis supporters in the crowd getting ready for him to make his speech, and there were even some people in the crowd kind of gasping that Gillum won. So, I mean, and these are political people who follow this stuff, and so it was, I mean, as Steve said, just a huge upset.
I think the people who were saying, that you would expect the Democrats would have wanted to face DeSantis. There are a lot of also people saying, be careful what you wish for. There's a lot of momentum behind this guy, a lot of interest behind this guy. I think you can sort of turn that on its head, too, and say, obviously Gillum, because he's the most progressive and maybe comes from a wing of the party that you would say traditionally may not speak to the middle, be careful what you wish for with him. He, the surge that we saw, I hate to use that word because it's been thrown around a lot in the last couple of weeks, but what we've seen in the last few weeks, with Bernie Sanders coming, the quick change in the polling that gave him this last break toward him, clearly there's some momentum behind his campaign, and he fires up a part of the party that hasn't felt like it's had a representation in a Democratic nominee in a long time.
Well, and that's a great point, too, about Bernie Sanders coming and stumping for Gillum, because Trump obviously came and stumped for DeSantis. And so we're seeing this race become extremely nationalized already. And I think a lot of us as Florida reporters were kind of hoping that once the primary was over, we were going to focus more on state issues and get into kind of the nitty-gritty of school choice and the algae crisis. And I'm not sure that we're going to see that. I think we're still going to be talking about Trump. We're still going to be talking about ICE and all of these big national issues because of who the nominees are.
I think in a way it's, I think you're right. I think, a Gwen Graham, Ron DeSantis was going to be sort of basically, is Florida heading in the right direction, as both Putnam and DeSantis were saying, or as the uniform Democratic argument, 20 years of Republican rule has brought us down the wrong path. But now you've got such a left-right contest. I'm afraid we're just going to be seeing, we're already seeing sort of Gillum's a socialist, he's represents Venezuela. I don't know that this is going to be the most substantive campaign around.
Well, and certainly their donors to this point have also shown more of a national interest in making this a national race as well. On the right, you have Sheldon Adelson, a lot of the pro-Israel groups who have donated a lot of money to DeSantis. Most of his money is from these individuals. On the other side, Gillum has gotten a lot of his money from Tom Steyer, George Soros, the sort of the bankrollers of the progressive cause at the national level. So what's going to happen when they have to start fundraising here? How does this all translate into support? And it's just like what you guys said, it's just a nationalization of this whole thing.
Do you think either of these sides, either the Republicans or the Democrats, are going to have a hard time coming together after these primaries?
I heard a few people who were very angry yesterday at Putnam's campaign watch party that Trump put his thumb on the scale in this race and said that the president has no place getting involved in party politics and that he should have just supported the nominee, whoever that may be. And a couple of them said it, one person said he is leaving the Republican Party tomorrow. Another person said he's never been so angry at a Republican president before. Now, those might be outlier opinions of the hardest Putnam supporters, but I think there is some anger at the president for getting involved, and I do wonder if that affects the ability to coalesce around Ron DeSantis.
My gut tells me, I talked to a lot of Republicans at Putnam events, almost to a person. They are reluctantly saying, oh yeah, when push comes to shove, I'm going to stick with my party. On the Democratic side, I could see some moderate to conservative Democrats saying, I can't stomach somebody that isn't quite willing, as Gillum was, isn't quite willing to say, I'm a capitalist versus a socialist. But that's probably going to be more than compensated from a fired up base, especially African Americans.
And if you African American voters who maybe have sat out the last couple elections since Obama, if they could, like you said, more than make up for that.
And let's talk about the Republican side. It's kind of being overshadowed by the historic upset, but that's an amazing result on the Republican side. Adam Putnam is not some fringe candidate.
Definitely.
So what was the atmosphere like at your?
Well, it was really interesting actually when they called the race, and it was less than 30 minutes after the polls in the Panhandle had closed. It was called very quickly. And it was pretty much a blowout. And the DeSantis fans...
And they were watching MSNBC when the results came in?
Yeah, no. There were 2 giant screens projecting Fox News in this huge ballroom in a hotel in Orlando. And they called the race, and I thought people were going to be, like they were at the Gillum event. I saw a video from the Gillum event. They were crying. They were emotional. Ron DeSantis, it was like, woohoo, okay, cool. And I was talking to people, this is not what I expected. I thought the crowd would be a little bit more fired up, and they were like, we knew he was going to win. We knew he was going to win all along, and that, I think, is really just reminiscent of Trump's victory. These hardcore supporters recognize the same kind of skepticism around Ron DeSantis that they saw around Trump. This guy who people discounted because he's not a political insider, he doesn't have as much money as Putnam, he doesn't have the connections, but he has the one connection that really mattered, and that was with the president.
On the flip side of that, at the Putnam rally, I don't want to say they're resigned to losing, but people, there was only 2 TVs that were even showing results, and no one was really watching it at all. I think the shock was that how quickly it was called, not necessarily that it was a loss. There were the tears and the hugging and the stuff of a campaign well fought and lost. But it almost, the atmosphere in there was like a big family gathering of all the people who had been around Putnam for 20 years, having one last hurrah and drink and dinner together before the inevitable came.
Do you think Putnam ran a strong campaign?
I think there are a lot of people who would say that he had, once Trump got involved, it was going to be difficult for him to win. And so you had sort of 2 choices. You either embrace Trump yourself and try to negate Trump's effect in the race, or, what was the alternative? Might have been to just run as like not a never Trump, but a clear alternative to Republicanism under Trump. Putnam kind of tried to straddle both, where he clearly was running campaign as it were like sanctuary cities are bad, and I support the president, and he's got Pam Bondi, who's one of Trump's biggest supporters, campaigning for him. On the other end, he's sort of also doing this, well, we need someone who knows Florida, and we don't want to bring D.C. politics down here, and it sort of gave this like mixed message where I don't know if he gave anyone a reason to run for him other than he's got a ton of experience, he's got all the backers of the sheriffs and party establishment. This has been something he's been working for his whole life, and he knows Florida. I don't know if that was enough.
He stressed that he was going to always make Florida his top priority, which had to be very disappointing to the people of Oklahoma. I never quite understood that. But I think that if he'd run a flawless campaign, and even if Trump had not endorsed him, I think a guy in this climate who's a career politician, who does have quite a few votes that were not hard line on immigration, might have been doomed anyway.
What if he ran as like a John Kasich though, and then suddenly you're getting a lot of airtime. You're battling DeSantis's free media that he was constantly getting on Fox News by constantly being on CNN, and maybe getting yourself in front of more voters that way.
But these are Republican voters. These are 8 to 9 out of 10 really support Trump.
Yeah. Was there? So if Trump gets involved, was there ever a path for him to win?
Right.
I think Congressman Matt Gaetz told me last night at the DeSantis victory party, I was asking him, do you think that DeSantis' alignment with Trump is going to hurt him in the general, and he just looked me dead in the eye and in true Matt Gaetz form said, I think Adam Putnam would have swam across Tampa Bay to get that endorsement. So
Yeah. I've heard some people suggest that Adam Putnam really lost this election before 2018 when behind the scenes DeSantis was doing some real maneuvering and effort to get the Trump endorsement, and Putnam wasn't working it. He tried to fend it off when it was too late.
And don't forget, Putnam was a flawed candidate in other ways too, besides not getting the Trump endorsement. His ties to Big Sugar made him very vulnerable, and DeSantis actually capitalized on that well. When there's a crisis, an environmental crisis going on right now that many people blame on the sugar industry, and he's getting millions and millions of dollars from them. That made him vulnerable. And he really wanted to run on guns, and his record increasing concealed weapons in the state of Florida to, it's 2 million people now have, and that's like what, 1 in 6 people, 1 in 8 people in the state have concealed weapons. That all happened under his watch. But as we reported and other people reported, the program was really mishandled during that time. There were multiple instances where they were giving licenses to people who shouldn't have had them, and that plus the NRA sellout tweet coming right before Parkland really sort of negated his ability to run on as a Second Amendment candidate.
At the very least, it was a huge distraction.
Yeah.
So he spent weeks responding to those things.
Well, and it's interesting too, because when you think mishandling concealed carry permits, you don't really think that would necessarily bother a Republican voter because they are so pro Second Amendment. But I did talk.
Too many people have guns?
Yeah.
No, not a problem.
Yeah, but it did bother at least some DeSantis supporters. I mean, they might have been supporting him anyway. But I talked to several people who told me back when this scandal was originally breaking that Republicans really do value competency in the job, and that was something that they saw Putnam didn't have after that scandal broke.
Who do you think is the favorite at this point? There have been some
man.
polls early on where Gillum was ahead of DeSantis.
I don't know.
It's sort of those same polls that showed if Bernie would have ran instead of Hillary,
Right,
he would have beat Trump.
And that's a good comparison because Bernie got very little tough coverage and tough attacks by rivals, and nor did Gillum. How do you think the FBI investigation plays?
I think that we really, in a perfect world, we really need to hear from the FBI soon as to what's there on this, and it would be nice if they could come to a conclusion very soon here. I mean, this guy is now the nominee for governor, and he has continually said that he is not going to be implicated. This does not involve him, but it's a definite cloud over him right now.
I agree. I think the FBI absolutely owes it to the people of Florida to come clean. Maybe they can't wrap up the investigation, but if it's true, especially that Gillum is not a target, that they need to say that.
But after what happened in 2016, I cannot imagine they would get involved to any degree.
I mean, what 2016 shows us is that the sooner the better. If they wait too long, it's going to be catastrophic for Gillum. So,
what else? Or should we wrap up, or is there any
Well,
other
there was some
surprises?
breaking news we just had right now. We should probably talk about, and that is Ron DeSantis, the morning after his election victory, is on Fox News, and he's talking about
He was
his
on Fox News.
Yeah.
Ron DeSantis.
Shocker, right?
Wow.
And he was talking about his new opponent, who's Andrew Gillum, who we know is the first nominee of a major party to be black. And he said that the state shouldn't monkey this up by electing Gillum, and he also referred to Gillum as an articulate spokesperson for the far left values. Immediately the Democratic Party of Florida and the Democratic Governors Association jumped on this and said, these are racial dog whistles. This is the kind of what you can expect from a Trump-backed candidate in Florida. We're not even 24 hours after the election results are finalized, and this is what we're already sort of seeing. And it's
that is such a Trump. I mean, DeSantis is a very smart guy. To use a term like "monkey this up," it's hard to think that was just an accident. Really. I mean,
his campaign has already put out a statement claiming that obviously we didn't mean any of this in a racial way, and any inference that we had is illegitimate. But clearly, the reaction was swift. Gillum is sort of stepping back, though. He's letting sort of the outrage come from other parts of the party, not from his campaign, which is an interesting move. But, there are already concerns that Trump and the difficulties he's had with black Americans and the things he's said about race in this country, that DeSantis would have to answer questions about those comments. And now here he is, less than 24 hours after his election victory, saying, monkey this up in reference to a black candidate.
How big a drag is Trump, do you think, on DeSantis? That's been something Democrats have been saying, that if he's the nominee, they're gonna hang Trump around his neck.
Right. Well, and I think DeSantis would say, bring it. I mean, he has, even when there was the big breaking news about Paul Manafort and Michael Cohen, hours later, Donald Trump was campaigning in West Virginia, and he brought up Ron DeSantis in West Virginia and said, my great friend Ron DeSantis, he got my endorsement and he's doing so well. And the DeSantis campaign retweeted that. They are 100% committed to Trump. That is their basis of their campaign, and they're not shying away from that. And the Democrats think that that's a disadvantage, and the DeSantis thinks that it's an advantage. So it's a clear line being drawn in the sand, and it's only, who knows how it'll work out.
And ironically, it's those swing voters, your suburban women, that arguably the Trump factor would have mattered the most and hurt DeSantis the most with. But now you've got I don't want to say far left, but basically a far left Democratic nominee. It might not be as effective with those.
It'll be interesting to see where Gillum's record sort of matches with that rhetoric that he is a far left, because he's been a pretty pro-business mayor.
He's not been a lefty socialist mayor.
Right? He on the campaign trail. He's been a lot of progressive ideas. When it comes to criminal justice reform and things that many Democrats think should be the tenets of the party. He's been out there in front of. But as a leader, an elected official in Tallahassee, he has sort of had a pro-business bent to some of his decisions. Of course, that's also what might have gotten him in trouble with the FBI. So it'll be interesting to see if he's able to more easily navigate toward the full tent of the Democratic Party than DeSantis is as a diehard Trumper.
Mm-hmm.
I think. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, if the last 12 hours are any indication, this is going to be ugly, I think, as politics always is. But even after his election victory speech last night, Ron DeSantis was already on Fox News saying, this guy, Gillum, he has a corruption scandal. Tallahassee has a high crime rate. There's no way we can trust this guy. The attacks started immediately.
Socialist.
Yeah, Ocasio-Cortez is already getting involved in the conversation.
All the things that Clinton people said, this is why we need Hillary over Bernie, because once we open Bernie up to these attacks, he has no chance against a Republican. Mm-hmm. We're already starting to see those.
By the way, Gillum was a big Hillary person. He wasn't a Sanders person.
And he's very close friends with Gwen Graham, and they kind of grew up together in
Speaking
politics.
Speaking of which, LG candidates, is Gwen Graham the most likely lieutenant governor for Andrew Gillum?
He's got a really interesting decision to make because, on the one hand, who cares? LG doesn't really do anything. But this is his first choice as a candidate, one of his big major decisions. Do you double down on the left? Do you go with someone who's also a minority or someone who's LGBT or progressive? Are you looking geography, Orlando, I-4? Or, him and Gwen Graham were friends before this campaign started. It'd be a heck of a statement to say, kumbaya, the two leaders of the Democratic in the Democratic primary are going to come together and run as a united ticket.
It would be interesting because, and I think very possible, but the Gillum team really went after Gwen Graham. Went after Mark.
And the Gwen Graham campaign was very upset about some of the ways that he did.
Mm-hmm.
What about on the Republican side? Do you think that there's a strong candidate for DeSantis?
There's been less big names thrown around on the DeSantis side than for Gillum, but last night he didn't answer the question. He just said, I'll pick somebody who's strong and who can step in my place when I need to, yada yada. But we'll see. It's, again, like Steve said, it's kind of one of those political insider questions that doesn't necessarily mean a lot in practical terms, but it is an indication of who they're kind of aiming for in the general.
You often have these identity politics, pick a box, but he probably could do well with a Hispanic candidate given how hardline he is on immigration. Mm-hmm. Let's wrap it up. Thank you guys very much.
Thanks, Adam.
Thanks, Adam.